Thanks, Charlie. So we're excited to have Joa Spearman from Localeur. And Joa, you can actually make your way up to the stage if you want. I'll keep my comments brief. We love to, wherever we go, have some local flavor. We're lucky enough to have Joa, who's an Austin guy. But more so than that, this really ties in with a lot of the themes we've been discussing so far today. Abid and I this morning talked about millennials, and that came up in a lot of different ways. But one of the things we discussed was the affinity that millennials have for things that are genuine or authentic. It's really a guiding principle for media, for advertising, for engaging them in lots of different ways. And that principle is infused at the core of Localeur. And we're going to hear that from Joa. But also it's worth noting that this is something where he's really kind of walking the walk and is right now a little over halfway through a multi-city tour. I believe the hashtag is hashtag 35 in 40.
Yeah, 35 cities.
And 35 cities in 40 days, where he's, among other things, really just kind of getting his hands dirty in kind of researching and living the fabric of communities, both from a small business perspective, from consumers, what millennials are doing, and really internalizing a lot of that, and writing about it. I'd encourage you to kind of follow along with his travel log, and you can give all the information for that. So I'll get out of the way. We'll let Joe give his presentation, then we'll have a fireside chat and even take some of your questions. So please join me in welcoming Joa.
All right, thank you. It's clicker. Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Really, I guess I should be saying welcome to Austin for many of you. This is the city that I've built my career in this company, Localeur, and I live, half a mile or so from here. But as Mike pointed out, I am actually on the road, so I flew here specifically to be here for this, but then I go back on the road, and I'm doing this crazy road trip of 35 cities in 40 days, driving city to city, meeting local business owners, meeting locals, meeting millennials, meeting even convention and visitors bureaus, just really getting to know these cities. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about touches on things that I'm literally living on a daily basis right now. So I'm here to talk about authenticity. And, you see that word a lot. It sounds like a buzzword. I'll get to that in a second. But this is how this became something that I talk about and something that I'm passionate about. So for me, I grew up, I'm the youngest of 3 boys. I have a single mother. She raised us on her lonesome. We grew up very poor, and no one in my family before had graduated from a 4-year university. There wasn't a lot of success in my family. So from a young age, I knew that was something that I wanted to make happen. And so all through middle school, high school, et cetera, I was really studying, focusing on one day going to college. And there was one last step, and that last step, even though I had all the great grades and activities, was I needed to pay for college. And here I was in Killeen High School, which is about an hour north of here, filling out over 100 college and scholarship essays. So these essays really helped me understand authenticity, because I started realizing that the only way that I was going to convince these college admissions boards or these scholarship acceptance people was that I was the person that needed this scholarship or admission was by telling them my real story. So I had a lot of practice, even at 17, 18 years old, on what authenticity meant to me. How could I convey my story to other people? So that's how I started. And then after college, I was a public relations communications major at University of Texas here in Austin. And then my first job out of college, after working in PR all through school for the Texas Longhorns, for Southwest Airlines, for Motorola, was I moved to Washington, D.C. at 22 years old, and Hurricane Katrina hit. And I was thinking I was going to work in the White House potentially, and then I got a phone call from the Office of Personnel Management in D.C. asking if I was interested in a job at the Department of Homeland Security. And so I asked what the job was, and they said, you'd be a speechwriter in FEMA. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty gnarly. This is right after Katrina hit. And so I moved to DC 3 weeks after Hurricane Katrina hit. Michael Brown, the previous director of FEMA, had been forced out or resigned maybe the weekend before. And the new director came in. His name was David Paulison. He was from Florida. And my first day was being his chief speechwriter. So here I am, first job out of college. And they've thrown me into this fire of, You have to write all the talking points, speeches, press releases, et cetera, for this entire agency for the next year. And that's what I did. And success to me in that moment was no one knows his name. No one remembers the name of the FEMA director after Michael Brown. That's success. You should not know his name. You should not know the name of the CIA director, possibly. These are people that their success is about whether or not they moved the ball forward and did their jobs effectively. If you know them, it's usually a crisis. So that was my first job, so I really understood authenticity in that moment was about doing the right thing and not about talking things and then doing something differently. And then over the years, I did social media consulting for several brands, ranging from my biggest client being FedEx to eventually starting to work with local Austin-based brands. And from that, I really rooted myself in working with building communities. I created and produced the first ever fashion component of South by Southwest Festival, 2010, 11, 12. And then from that was recruited by a tech company here in Austin called Bazaar Voice that works in user-generated content with a lot of the brands that you know. And I was the director of operations there before their IPO. And from there, I really got passionate about travel because at Bazaar Voice, we started working with some of the top hotel companies in the world, some of the top online travel agencies, and I realized there were a lot of gaps in travel specifically. The biggest gap I noticed was authenticity. And so what we did is one of my co-founder left Bazaar Voice as well, and we started this company called Localeur. Localeur is a community for local. It's local recommendations on where to eat, drink, shop, et cetera, only from locals. So we started thinking about authenticity day one because we felt like millennials especially wanted a resource where they could go through the clutter, skip through it, and know exactly where locals go. So we do this by, we share recommendations from millennials. 80% of our users, 83% are millennials. We have over 1 million users. We're in 20 cities. We're actually expanding nationally right now. And you can just see, I don't know how much you can see this, but this is what our community is telling us. Come to Tokyo, come to Toronto, come to Cairo. So these are tweets that we have generated from real users in different places saying, come to my city. And this is kind of some of what you hear about Localeur, what we've been able to secure. Without a PR agency, we do not have money for that. We're a really lean startup. So it really, even those quotes come across as, you look at this and it just feels authentic. It feels cool. It feels appropriate for the audience we concern ourselves with, which really is millennials, which I'm sure a lot of you are trying to do that as well. So there are really two things to think about with authenticity. One is this a buzzword and it's not material? If you believe it is, then you probably should not be in this talk. But if you believe that it may be foundational and paramount to success, then that's what this is about. So here are some of the just quick little things that I know that remind me on a daily basis about authenticity. Old media was about the Dan Rather, Katie Couric, top down, I'm reading the prompter. Now we have people like Jon Stewart, Ellen, who are really just bringing their personalities through. They could be talking about the exact same issues, but now they're coming through with much more personality. And we're even seeing with media, right? NBC, ABC, CBS, those are being supplanted by the Vice Medias of the world in a lot of ways, from a over-the-top or digital media standpoint. And that just has to do with the kinds of content. And then you'll see some other examples. I mean, the music one I think is really near and dear for me. I attend a lot of festivals, I listen to a lot of music, and we're now in this platform where there's a lot of information, and we're looking for people to help us curate that information, and we need authentic sources to do that. Coachella, C3, these different companies that book these festivals, they help us curate from hundreds of different sources of music who we should be listening to. So we know that who's driving this conversation around authenticity, it's not any other generation other than millennials. From 2008 on, we've seen this happen. From Obama being elected in 2008, the creation of iPhones and the power that iPhones have brought to technology, plenty of apps and different companies, even movements. Black Lives Matter, Bernie Sanders' campaign, these things are built on the backs of millennials. They're built on the backs of a concept around authenticity. Here are some recent wins. Facebook. So when someone thinks Facebook, right, they don't think, oh, that's it, they just scream authenticity. But here's what Facebook did. Facebook saw MySpace, and MySpace was out there for everyone. There was no filter, no barrier to entry for MySpace. MySpace was everything to everyone who wanted to do social networking. Facebook came along and said, no, we're gonna create a more authentic product use case for who? College students, Ivy League college students. So what they did is they said, it's okay if not everyone gets us, not everyone wants us, not everyone uses us. Let's nail it for these people. And so that worked for them. What they showed is that you can scale from a small base to a large base, as opposed to starting globally and narrowing down over time. And then another example there you'll see is, I put up Snapchat. I just recently started using Snapchat before this big road trip I'm on. And I'm still a heavy Twitter user, but here's the difference. Twitter is at that point in their life cycle as a business where they really are trying to do everything for everyone. From what they're doing from a product standpoint, what they're doing to please Wall Street, they really have to try to do everything. And Snapchat, meanwhile, is going about its business and saying, well, we're for the people who use Snapchat. That could be millennials, that could be college kids, that could be brands, but if you don't use it, that's fine. And they're still at that point in their life cycle. Now, who knows, maybe in 5 years, 3 years even, Snapchat will be on the market and have to do everything. But there's something that's positive about these companies. There's a reason why Airbnb and Uber and Snapchat are not publicly traded today, because that's kind of a trigger. When you become publicly traded, you're looking at all the options for growth. Whereas when you're private, you're just focusing on the ones that work. And then some other examples, Michelle Obama, Neil deGrasse Tyson, these people, their brands are built on authenticity. Their whole brands are built on, and I'm not talking about their brands are built on not telling lies. That's different. I'm not talking about trust. I'm not talking about honesty. I'm talking about genuine. I'm talking about authenticity. That's a different thing. So being authentic doesn't mean you're right all the time. It doesn't mean you don't make mistakes. It means that you understand who you are, who your brand is, who your voice is, and you share that, right or wrong, and you live with the results. And this is a quote from one of my investors. One of my lead investors was Facebook's head of revenue pre-IPO. And this is kind of what he said when he made the investment. So you can kind of see how people take to what I'm working on a daily basis. And then here are some other investors. We raised a couple $1 million, and some of these names will stand out. We have everyone from Beyonce's manager to people at Facebook, to people in the Austin tech community here, like Silicon Labs. And so what that shows is that there are different industries that understand authenticity. Whether you're in the music business or tech or social, authenticity is like a currency that works across the board. It doesn't just work in restaurants or it doesn't just work in consumer product goods. It works across the board. And so for us, this is not for you, but this is for me. I'm going to show you how we think about leveraging authenticity. So we look at this market and we say, well, if $200 million is going to get spent this year on travel in the US, and $36 billion is going to get spent on people figuring out things to do, that's the sandbox for us to play in. Now, let's not be everything to everyone. Let's be something to, in this example, Samantha, who's 29 years old and lives in West Hollywood. So we don't concern ourselves with her mom, her grandmother, maybe not even her older sister who may not be a millennial. We're concerned with her. She's got some disposable income, and we want to know more than where she lives and how old she is. We want to know, oh, she has friends in New York. We want to know how often is she traveling. We want to know if she drinks coffee. We want to know where she parties. So what Localeur is in the business of doing is either getting Samantha to share with us her favorite places in Los Angeles where she's a local, and then us sharing that data with people in other places, especially people like her friends in New York who are going to listen to her. Or we're in the business of saying, that's okay, Samantha, when you're in New York, trust the locals there. You don't live there. Listen to the locals. It's a much more authentic message than saying, here's a travel guidebook, and we've paid a lot of writers to give you this information on where to go. And so for us, I'll just be super transparent with you. These are our competitors. Our competitors are Yelp and TripAdvisor. We don't care about anyone else. Yelp, for us, we look at them and we say they're really focusing on making money. They're doing a really, really great job of doing it. The problem is you can make a lot of money, but until your user base, if your user base is not growing, the money becomes secondary. And TripAdvisor, they're not focused on millennials. Their average user is 46 years old. Our average user is 29 years old. So when we think about what we're doing, we're thinking about, let's market to that user who is 29 years old. Let's not worry about the user who's not. And again, we are okay with some people not liking us. And that's a part of our message from an authentic standpoint is we can turn some people off. That is okay. And actually, even better than turning people off, what we do is we don't even focus on them at all. We focus on the people who are going to receive our message at this stage. Not everyone who's going to be the first 1 million users in Localeur or the first 5 million are going to be the people who are going to be helping us grow when we're at 10 million or 20 million users. So you have to think about where you are in your adoption cycle as well. And so for us in this space, we know that there are a lot of companies that have tried and failed. City Search, they really focused on information. Foursquare, they really focused on location. GoGoBots really focused on social. I'm being super transparent. You can copy this, I'll send it to you. This is how we look at our industry. GoGoBots really focus on social. Soch has already been acquired. They really focus on events or happenings. And so for us, we are focused on authenticity. We are focused on the single hardest thing to measure because you cannot go Google total addressable market authenticity and find a number for how much value that is. You can figure out how much events are worth, how much location data is worth. So we feel like actually, because you can't measure authenticity, it's more valuable than the stuff you can measure. And so some of the ways that we've been able to get our message out is through media. Organic, unpaid. Because of our message around authenticity, we play a counter message. So if you are a leading publication out there, your publication has written 10,000 articles about TripAdvisor and Yelp over the years. You're done with them. So we look for those millennial writers at these publications, and we target them and we say, we just want you to use Localeur. And those young millennial writers realize immediately that Localeur is the thing that they want to use more than the TripAdvisor or Yelp, so then they write about us. And a lot of these publications have lowered their own barriers to what a contributor is. They've gone away from you have to be the editor approved person to you can be someone of credibility and you are allowed to write for us. And that's a lot of what we do with our media leveraging. And then here's the part where I hope you're taking notes. This is how it applies to you. Authenticity it's 5 things. 1, foundational. So the number 1 thing is you really have to have a point of view about the problem you're trying to solve. If you don't have a point of view about the problem you're trying to solve and you're in business to make money, then you're going to have a problem in this new age. Second is you really have to be vocal about what that is. You can't hide in the dark anymore. People want to know why it is you're trying to solve this problem. So I'll use a recent example. Let's look at Airbnb. So what problem is Airbnb trying to solve? Well, it's really not that big of a problem, is it? I mean, they really want it, similar to Localeur, they want people to feel like they're locals. They want people to feel like they're rooted in the neighborhoods. So the problem is not really this massive problem like world hunger or something, right? The problem is that discomfort. They realize, millennials especially, don't feel comfortable when they go to a new city. How can we help them feel comfortable? Put them in the middle of a neighborhood, similar to the kind of neighborhood they would live in. And so being social about that is saying, be everywhere, be local anywhere, or whatever the message is that they're playing around with. Localize where you're trying to solve this problem. Geography is a huge factor in marketing results. And if you're here, you already know that. It's really important to localize your messages. We run Facebook ads, Twitter ads, Google ads. We localize all those messages. And it's really important, not only just to optimize it for performance, but also because you don't want to kill these massive messages by playing them out across the country or across the world. You really want to localize them because if you find something that works in Toronto or Denver, then maybe you can try it in the other market. But more importantly, you find that message that works and you're going to get a certain type of user in Denver or Toronto that's different than people in other cities. And then you're going to learn more things down the road. So you'll be getting different types of new users as opposed to getting the same person over and over, which is going to lead you to kind of the problem that companies like Yahoo and Twitter have, which is they have this huge base of users, but they only know how to get that user. And anytime they tweak the product to try to get a different user, it fails. So that's going to be a tough problem. You're going to put yourself in a corner if you do that. You need to constantly be learning how to get new types of users, stretching yourself, stretching your ad dollars, stretching your marketing spend to get different types of people at all times. Personal. The piece there, I'll say, is this. So I'm on this road trip, and there's a hashtag. It's called 35 and 40. You can see it on Twitter. You can see it on Instagram. The reason why I've done this road trip is because Localeur is hitting that stage where we're growing pretty rapidly, and I don't want to land in 6 months from now with 5 million users instead of a million or so we have today, and people think that Localeur is just this like faceless, nameless brand that they've started seeing on Facebook or they've seen on a couple of articles. It's really important that they have some connection point to a person. And that's why you see some of the top brands, that's why you see Mark Zuckerberg debuting all these big products, right? It's because he wants to keep, even though they have 1.5 billion users monthly, they need to keep that face there so people understand that that's the point of reference. The last is aspirational. So yes, you're trying to solve that problem, but you have to think even bigger than that problem. For us, the problem we're trying to solve is that people don't know where the cool local places are. And we want to tell them. We want to build a community to tell them where the cool local places are. But the aspirational thing is way bigger than that. The aspirational thing is that we know that a high percentage of dollars stay in local communities if you support locally owned businesses. We know that. Data shows that. So aspirationally, we're talking about helping cities be better versions of themselves. If you have more local business owners, more local businesses, you're fostering better cities. And so that's the aspirational message. Some people grab onto that message, but it's really too high for most people. But we always have to be putting up something aspirational that's pulling where you really are, the problem you're trying to solve, further and further out. So I even see now, Snapchat, 2 years ago was saying it was like short burst of content, right? Just like little ephemeral tweets almost. But now you see them, they're like, no, this is like media. This is the new age of media. They're like, that's a very aspirational message for like a 4 or 5 or whatever year startup to say that they're really bringing this new landscape for media. And so I think you always have to be painting a picture of which some things are up in the clouds and then some things are on the ground. And the ground is where you are and where you're collecting users and customers. And up in the sky is where you're trying to take those people and make them really excited to join your community. I wanted to make sure to leave time for questions. My contact information is there, and that's my Twitter. That is my email address. And I think Mike is going to come up. We're going to do a little Q&A.
Sure. Have a seat. Let's talk.
All right.
So, actually, I'll go over here.
Yeah.
So I want to hear more about your road trip.
Yeah.
Very unique. And what I'm wondering is, what are you finding? I mean, I'm sure you're finding a lot of things, but are there universal truths out there in terms of behavior, both from businesses and from users? To what degree is that universal, and what kind of trending are you seeing there versus geographic variations, whether that be urban versus rural, or what are you finding that's kind of surprising you?
Well, the number one universal truth is the point I made earlier about geography.
Okay.
It's table stakes.
Yeah.
Millennials are the most mobile generation. That means we change jobs often, we change cities often, we're willing to pick up and leave. And so we're a generation that chose where we live. Yep. Not all, but a high percentage of millennials have said, I want to live in that city. And they make a point to go to that city.
Yep.
And so you really have to understand the kind of person that lives in New York, that moved to New York from Kansas, or that lives in Los Angeles, that moved there from Texas, or you have to understand, why is that person out there? Cities have become the new aspiration. Is I aspire to live in that kind of city and be the kind of person that thrives in that city. Well, why is that? You have to find that out.
Sure. Now, we spend a lot of time talking about millennials as consumers and the need to take that to heart when building products and selling things, et cetera. But one thing we don't often talk about, and Abid and I talked about this morning, is the fact that the oldest millennials are around 36 years old. They are also slowly taking over the ranks of proprietorship. So millennials as small businesses, as media buyers, are a lot of the things we're talking about translating to their behavior, not as consumers, but as businesses.
I'm 33.
Yeah.
I started in this whole thing. I owned a sneaker boutique 7 years ago. That's what really got me really passionate about owning local businesses and supporting them. A lot of my friends own local businesses who are around the same age, and then when I go to New York, I'm meeting with people who control ad budgets and control media buys for big brands, and I think that the thing that's happening is not only are we becoming the owners of the businesses or the controllers of the budgets, but we're speaking to ourselves, which is something that hasn't happened. I mean, marketers haven't been speaking to themselves since the mid-90s.
Yep.
Pretty much from 2000 to 2010, marketers were trying to get younger people or possibly older people. But the mid-90s were the last time where you had a generation saying, this is what you want, because I know that I want this and you want this too. So this is the first time in a long time that we've seen this.
Sure.
And so I think for the next 5 to 7 years, you're going to see a lot of direct marketing where it's, hey, here's the marketer coming up with an idea that works for them, and they sell it to someone because it works for them.
Now, what are some of the other channels that kind of breed that authenticity and really kind of exemplify a lot of the principles you talked about? You mentioned Snapchat. Snapchat, you know, semi-recently has been doing more interesting things with local stories, geo-filters.
Yep.
Is that seen as really kind of an authentic channel, do you believe?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The reason why it's authentic is because it's immediate, right? You're in the moment. And so the issue that Twitter has is that it has this perception of either you're aspiring to have an audience or you already have an audience. So you're a celebrity, you're a thought leader, you're known, and you have a big audience and here's your megaphone. Or you're aspiring, you're really hoping that someone pays attention. Whereas on Snapchat, you pretty much have all that in one package. So you have both the thought leadership is like, well, this is what I'm seeing right now, this is what I'm doing right now. So there is no one else can weigh in and say that they're seeing something different. You're there. So I think that's what they've nailed is that they've cut the middleman out of like the person has to decide, do I want to follow them or are they important? And they said, well, if you saw it, and if you didn't, so be it. And so I think that over time we're going to see more different channels pop up that really just close the gap on the separation between the aspiring person and the doing, and just make it one person.
One area that I'm looking at a lot these days that kind of brings to mind is what we call conversational commerce. So it's using messaging apps like Snapchat. Snapchat hasn't really gone there yet, but Facebook Messenger, Kik, others that are basically building in chatbots, ways to, instead of the relatively convoluted process we've come to know on the desktop of you type in a search term and then you get 10 blue links and it's information about information and then hierarchies of information down. Instead, it's more of a direct connection. But the question I have is, not for now, but also in general, is, are these places that have erstwhile been more about kind of a social context, friends talking to friends, going to be a place where you can talk to a local business, either transact through a chatbot or just ask about their hours of operation? Or is this going to be a venue where search or other things will be displaced in the kind of conversational threads?
Yeah, what I'm thinking about, to me, search is like a platform, so I don't know if it's going to be displaced as much as there will be other ways to leverage search to put that in, bring that into Messenger. Maybe you'll be chatting with someone, and you'll immediately be able to do a small box and search something and dump that into the conversation. I just think, I don't know if search will be replaced. I think from a spend standpoint, possibly. Like I definitely, when Localeur started, we spent a lot more money doing search results and AdWords than we do now. Now we are much more focused on social ads and the localized ads and whatnot. But I do think that with Messenger, I mean, the tough thing about Messenger is eventually you're going to have to say who the person is on the other side if you're a brand, right? I don't think you're just going to be able to survive with like, hey, we are Chase Bank and we're messaging back with you. I think eventually it's going to have to be, I'm Tanya at the Chase Bank up the street. And so they'll have to distribute all that customer support, so it's not just people in the center in Indianapolis or something, but it's people like all over representing the online part of that local business.
Sure. And Google just launched its keyboard for iOS, which is, its keyboard where you can install and do search and bring in things directly from that interface, which is an interesting move from Google to kind of plant itself.
Well, they're all trying to, Google and Apple and Facebook, Facebook and Apple both obviously built these closed networks intentionally. And Google's, what they do are they're hackers, they're engineers, so they're finding ways to hack into these closed networks.
Well, it's a Trojan horse to basically present themselves in that environment where they're otherwise not native. It's interesting. Now, to close off here, this is a conference we are billing as being very actionable and tactical. You guys are seeing some impressive growth. I think you're on pace for 2 million users by the end of the year.
It took us 31 months to get to 1 million users. It'll probably be about 7 months to get to 2 million, 3 months to get to 3 million. So we'll probably have more growth in the next 4 months than our previous 3 years.
Excellent. Now, so what are some of your biggest takeaways or tactical things you want to leave with this audience with, either things to avoid or things that you would point to attribute some of that growth?
Well, here's one thing. So back to the authenticity message about with Localeur especially. When we started, we were marketing to travelers. So that's how we market it. We market it to use Localeur when you travel. We did that because we were only in one city. We were in Austin. And then we were in 5 cities. But even in 5 cities, are not everywhere. So we really didn't feel confident enough to market directly to the locals in those cities, because each city was so important for our network that we're like, if we market to the locals in New York and they don't like us, then we're screwed.
Yeah.
So what we would do is we'd market to people in DC and Philly and say, go to New York, use this. And it didn't work that well. We didn't experience any growth really in the first year. And then a switch hit, and we said, we got to a point where we were in about 12 cities. And we said, I think that we're in a lot of the cities that millennials care about. Let's focus to locals instead, which is a much more authentic message to say, you either know this information or you want to know it because you live in the city.
Yeah.
And so we flipped our marketing from focusing on travelers to locals. And literally, we had more growth in year 3 than years 1 and 2 combined. And so the thing that I would say is always be assessing, like, are you speaking to the right audience in the right way? And for us, we realized speaking to travelers was too aspirational. It was too high up there. It wasn't on the ground enough. So we had to go to the locals, and that was on the ground level.
Yeah. Another interesting lesson I take out of that is similar to what Stephen Johnson was talking about earlier, which is always be aware of all of these different signals that may have kind of an unintended consequence that if you're paying attention to, a kernel of a new business kind of direction could be there if you're paying attention, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we'll end on that note. Please join me in thanking Joa.